Good afternoon and welcome to the latest in the Anaphylaxis campaign series of webinars. I'm once again joined by our Information and Helpline Manager, Moira Austin.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Moira, for giving your time. This webinar is going to be looking at issues that affect people with allergies over the Christmas period. It's a wider period actually because we're looking at sort of all the things that are associated with Christmas, like socialising, eating out, spending time with family and friends. So it will cover quite a wide range of topics. As always, the webinar will be available to view again via a link on our YouTube channel, which will be available on our website shortly after we finish. You are able to put forward questions which we will answer after the broadcast if you use the box that you see on your screen now. However, I would just like to point out that we're covering quite a wide range of issues, so it might be that your question will be answered, in which case please feel free to call us on the helpline when we can actually discuss all your issues after the broadcast is finished. So Moira, Christmas, quite a tricky time in some cases, and it's all about food. A lot of it's about food.
Yes, predominantly.
Food is very, very important.
Of course.
Lots of eating out, but lots of also buying things that you might not be buying throughout the year. Now, obviously, there are laws around labelling of food labelling, which are in effect all through the year, not just an issue at Christmas. Maybe we could start with just reminding ourselves what the laws are regarding labelling.
Absolutely, yes. Well, a new legislation became enforceable from December 2014, and it covered both pre-packaged foods and also, which is probably more important for this particular topic, food sold loose. But just to cover initially the pre-packaged foods. Now, and this is a legislation that applies throughout Europe. Pre-packed foods have to have major allergens. There's a list of 14 major allergens that apply throughout Europe. And if they are present in a pre-packaged food, they have to be highlighted in some way in the ingredients. So they can be either emboldened, they can be a different colour, a different typeface, but they have to be highlighted in some way. Another change that applied when this legislation became enforceable was that previously food companies were allowed to put a box underneath the ingredients saying contains. So this box highlighted the major allergens that were present in the product. So they'd have the list of ingredients and you'd have a box saying contains milk, contains egg, contains nuts. That is now no longer allowed to be present. So food companies aren't allowed to put a contains box in addition to the list of ingredients. However, the precautionary or may contain labelling is still allowed. Although I think it's important to stress, and I think some people are still a little bit confused by this, it's important to stress that may contain precautionary labelling is not a legal requirement. So that food companies, most food companies do use precautionary labelling if there's a risk of cross-contamination, but they don't have to. So you can't necessarily assume if there isn't a may contain warning on a product that product is safe. I think if you know the company, most of the major supermarkets, most of the major food manufacturers do use precautionary labelling. But if you buy a small product maybe from the corner shop, especially perhaps one that's been imported, if it doesn't have a may contain label, it doesn't necessarily mean that the product doesn't have a risk of cross-contamination. So I think it's important to bear that in mind.
And of course, if they're not allowed to use the contains labelling, then really you need to be looking at the ingredient lists now, whereas you say it will be involved. But if before you were used to looking for contains as your marker for not buying or buying a certain food, now you need to look at the actual ingredient list.
And I think that was one of the reasons for it. I think sometimes people were taking a shortcut. And you can understand it when mums go into the supermarket and they've got a trolley load of dozens and dozens of items and maybe a couple of small children. It's perhaps quicker just to have a look and see if it says contains. But sometimes mistakes were made. So yes, you've now got to have a look at the ingredients. But it's the food sold loose really that is more important at this time of year. And there was quite a big change in the legislation in 2014, which means that previously if you went into a restaurant or if you went and bought foods sold loose in a supermarket, the companies weren't legally obliged to tell you if that food contained your problem allergen. Now they will have to do so. So if you're allergic to one of those 14 major allergens, if you go into a restaurant, a snack bar, if you buy food loose in the supermarket from the deli counter, from the bakery counter, if you ask the staff there if that food contains one of those 14 allergens, they have a legal obligation to provide that information and say yes it does or no it doesn't.
Right.
They can't get away with saying we don't know or we're not sure.
Right. So when you go into any eating establishment, anywhere where food is served, this would be the case.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
And if they haven't got it listed in writing, they can tell you verbally. Is that right?
They can do in the UK. In some countries in Europe, they've made their own national legislation. Right. Whereby that they stipulate that this information has to be given in writing in some way. Over here, it can be on the menu, it can be on a chalkboard, it can be written up somewhere, but they are allowed to give you that information verbally. If they're going to give the information verbally, they will legally have to have a sign up saying, if you have an allergy, ask a member of staff. So if they're not providing the information in a written format, they have to have a signage up. Saying that you can ask a member of staff for information. So that applies, as I say, to if you go to a restaurant and if you go to any event that's being catered for. Yeah. I think that the only issue is at this time of year that a lot of people go to maybe a meal that's cooked by families and friends, parties. And this legislation obviously doesn't apply. Yeah. It's just an individual, making food for friends or family. So if you're put in a situation like that, then it's really important to question the person that's providing the food to you and ask them, if it contains the food that you're allergic to. And if you're not sure, if they're not sure, it's probably best just to be cautious and avoid it. And I think, for children, possibly maybe take, you can take your own food for them. And because
it would probably be a sensible idea to tell the relative or friend in advance, because there's nothing wrong with asking them to keep the packaging or the ingredient list, and then you can check yourself. And then, of course, as you say, either take your own food or make alternative arrangements.
Exactly. Actually, that just reminds me as well. In a restaurant, or if food's being sold loose, if they are going to provide this information to you verbally, you also have a right to ask them to verify that information.
Right.
So they will, if you ask them, they have a legal obligation to be able to demonstrate that information is correct. So again, they can provide the packaging or some means to verify that the information that they've given to you is accurate.
I think that's a very sensible idea. Otherwise, you're taking someone's word for it, aren't you? And the same applies as any other time of the year. If you're in any doubt at all, then you need to find somewhere else to eat.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
And so staying on the subject of food, are there any particular foods to watch out for over the Christmas period that people might not be sort of aware of?
Yes, I think there are quite a few food items that are typically associated with Christmas that probably, to be fair, people with nut allergy more than the other allergens have a problem with. So obviously things like sort of mince pies, Christmas puddings, stuffings, Christmas cake, most of those do tend to have nuts. But there are other items. I think you find sometimes in restaurants that chefs use a bit of poetic license and they may sprinkle almonds over Brussels sprouts.
Oh yes.
I think also in a restaurant there are quite a few bread rolls that may contain nuts or seeds. So I think that's something else to watch out for. And also sauces, sometimes again you have to be a bit careful. But ask, make sure you ask. And I think you get a feel for whether or not somebody is giving you accurate information or they're just guessing. And if you're not sure, press them a bit further. And again, if you're really not sure, it's probably best to avoid that particular food.
Yes.
So yes, I think that's marzipan as well. Marzipan and praline, I think, are foods that are perhaps commonly eaten at Christmas, and marzipan, of course, contains almond.
Yeah. And are there sort of allergen safe products? Are there alternatives that we could recommend or that you've heard of?
Yes, if you go onto the websites of some of the major supermarkets and the food retailers, they will often provide you with lists of products that are free from particular ingredients. There's also a very, very good app that you can download onto your smartphone. It's called Food Maestro, and it's actually produced by one of the top allergy specialists in the country. and it will, if you put in what you're allergic to, it will pull up a lot of foods that are free from that particular
oh, that's great.
allergen. Yes, and also combinations. You know, if you're allergic to multiple foods.
Yeah.
You can put all of those in, and it'll pull up lists of. It's not comprehensive, but I think they've got on board a lot of the major supermarkets, so to bring up a lot of the supermarket items.
So you could put in that you wanted a nut-free mincemeat, for example, for making mince pies,
yes.
and then, yes. so that would be a good starting point. I think many people over the years have told us that when it comes to Christmas cooking, quite a lot of it has to be done from scratch, homemade,
yes,
if you're going to make it safe, which,
yes.
you know, a lot of people do cook a lot at Christmas, but there are certain things that maybe it would be better going back to scratch and actually cooking yourself.
Absolutely. Yes.
And as we keep saying as well, if you're in any doubt at all, don't risk it, because it really isn't worth it.
One other thing I was going to mention, actually, when we were talking about products that may be risky at Christmas, I know at Christmas there are a lot of the chocolate baubles and things that you hang on Christmas trees.
Yes.
And quite often these come in packs.
Yes.
And the ingredients and any may contain warnings will be on the outer pack. But sometimes these products are separated. So you may get a plastic bag that has lots of little chocolate baubles in it, and they will be split up, and sometimes these are given out to children use. So the ingredients and the allergen information may not be present on the actual chocolate that you buy. So again, you know, unless you've got access to the full list of ingredients, then it's better to beware. And I think another thing to be very, very cautious of at this time of year is things like you get Christmas markets, you get pop-up stores, Christmas pop-up stores, and you sometimes find that imported products turn up in these markets, and they may have been imported not by the major companies, so they've perhaps been imported by small importers. And rather than having the packaging that is specified for this country, they'll oversticker the ingredients.
Oh, right.
So watch out for any products in markets, Christmas markets, pop-up stores. If it's been overstickered, just be very careful, check the ingredients. And there have been cases where the over-stickering information is actually not accurate.
Right.
Particularly that we found cases where if you peel off the outer sticker and have a look underneath, there's a may contain warning, which they haven't put on the over-stickering. So, you know, if there are products out there that you see, it's always good to sort of pull off the over-sticker and have a look underneath.
Yes.
And also, I think you sometimes get products that are brought into this country, maybe by the companies that we know and love, you know, the chocolate companies, and they may be made abroad in a different factory. So it may be, I don't know, you know, the chocolate bars that we know over here, but it may be made abroad and brought over here, and they may have been perhaps made in a different condition, a different factory abroad. And therefore, if you're used to it being, you know, free from a particular allergen over here, it may not be the same. So be very cautious of you know, products that are perhaps bought at these Christmas markets.
And always read the actual ingredient list, which just worries may not be on the individual chocolate. So we've talked about food labelling. Does the same rule apply for alcohol?
Yes and no. Alcoholic drinks do not have to have a full list of ingredients as pre-packaged foods do. However, the law does dictate or does state that major allergens do have to be declared.
This is one of the 14 of 14.
Again, it's the 14 major allergens. So whilst there isn't a full list of ingredients on alcoholic drinks, as you would find on a normal pre-packed food, the product would have to say if it contains sulfites, it would have to say contains sulfites. If it contained egg, I know some drinks maybe that they use egg and milk to actually as finings for wines, etc. And that would have to be declared. So it would have to say contains egg, contains milk, contains sulfites.
Right.
If it says that, it doesn't have to be emboldened as it would in a pre-packed food.
Oh, right.
But that they do have to state if it contains one of those major allergens.
So that's quite useful. But obviously, at this time of year, people are drinking maybe more alcohol. and also a wider variety of alcohol that you may not drink throughout the year.
Yes,
Things come out at Christmas that
right.
maybe that's the only time they come out.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be a problem. Alcohol can be a problem for a number of reasons other than the labelling issue, can't it? We should beware.
Yes, that's right. I think that twofold really. I think if you're drinking alcohol, you sometimes drop your guard a little bit. You may not be quite as vigilant with checking labels or with asking. And obviously that could lead to problems. But also that there is quite a bit of evidence which suggests that alcohol can actually sort of speed up a reaction. So if you've been drinking and you have a reaction, it may actually speed things up. And other factors such as if your asthma's poorly controlled, if you've been exercising, and certain types of medication, if you're having a reaction, that these certain, they call them extrinsic factors, and alcohol is one of them, they can possibly make a reaction worse. And there are particular products, I think, as well, that maybe at Christmas, again, for people with the nut allergy, there are some liqueurs that contain nuts. I think Bombay Sapphire Gin actually has nuts in it. And there are 1 or 2 liqueurs that contain nuts, so do check the label. And I think, you know, if you get, particularly perhaps for young people, if you're going out to parties at Christmas, it's probably a good idea to do a little bit of research beforehand, sort of find out, you know, if you're intending on drinking something different, check beforehand, find out which products you're safe with. And then, you know, if you go out to a party, at least you feel fairly confident in being able to order those drinks.
And I suppose you need to remember as well that if you are out drinking and you do have a reaction, it is very important that people know that you have an allergy, so people don't just think that you're just drunk. Particularly for young people, wearing a medical alert bracelet and making sure that the people that you're out with know that you're allergic, so that it isn't just considered that you've drunk too much alcohol and that's why you're maybe acting differently. So it's very important that people know, isn't it, that the people you're out with. Yeah.
One other factor actually, which has just occurred to me, I think, and again it applies throughout the year, but there have been some situations where young people go into clubs and they've actually taken their injector. They've said to them, you're not allowed into the club with your injectors. But I mean, we would say to people, never leave your injector with anybody. You know, if they're asking to take it off you, even if they say, look, we'll get it to you in an emergency, don't let them take it. It's got to be with you at all times.
And that's where doing a bit of homework in advance is quite. So if you are going to a club that you haven't been to before, particularly one of the big city centre clubs, it's worth giving them a ring in advance and just explaining the situation. As with anything, at any time, don't have your injector taken off you. Make sure you've got it, and make sure the people you're with know where it is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that you hear a lot on the helpline, which is probably more prevalent at Christmas, is that loose nuts in supermarkets. Now this is a big bugbear, isn't it? It's not fair and it's not right. But what's the current situation, and is there anything people can do?
Yes, I think it's awareness. You know, we have had communication with a lot of the supermarkets about this, and it tends to only happen at Christmas. You know, you get these loose nuts.
Apart from Lidl, sorry to interrupt you, which do it all year round that we've heard. So that Lidl do have loose nuts all year round, but I think we've spoken to them a number of times, and there isn't a great deal that people can do other than to be aware.
So. Be very aware, that's right. And I think if you've got small children, you know, when you go in, I think 1 or 2 of the supermarkets now do actually have signs up when you go in saying that, you know, please be aware that there are loose nuts for sale in the store. So I think just you know, be on your guard, particularly if you've got small children, and make sure they stay with you. I think if you're able to speak to your supermarket, you know, that there are things that they can do to make the situation a bit safer. I mean, the ideal situation would be for them to be in bags, and some supermarkets do sell them in sort of sealed plastic bags.
Right.
So that's less of a risk. But a lot of them are sold loose or in the little the sort of string bags sort of thing. And there is concern that obviously the nuts will get broken. The shells themselves shouldn't cause a problem, it's the nut inside, but of course shells do get broken. And the nuts can spill out, they can go onto the floor, there can be breakages. They can get onto the trolleys, they can get onto the belts, the checkout belts, and I think, you know, these are the sort of concerns that people have. So have a word with your supermarket and just say, look, you know, there are things you can do. If you can perhaps keep all the nuts in one section, maybe keep them higher up so children can't reach them, but make sure they're not above foods that they can contaminate. Perhaps say, you know, can a member of staff make sure, just check them and make sure that there aren't any breakages, or if there are breakages, can they be swept up as quickly as possible. Maybe sort of wipe if you find it's contamination on the checkout belts, you know, make sure that any spillages are cleaned up and wiped up. It is difficult, but they're going to be out there. There's not a lot you can do about it, really. But just, you know, be vigilant, and you know, if you've got if you have a chat with the manager of your local branch or the staff, and see if there's anything they can do to perhaps improve the situation or make the situation a little bit safer. Yes,
and one of the things that we talk about with young people when we were doing our workshops is the whole issue of how to be safe when kissing. And kissing under the mistletoe is something that maybe is people need to be aware of. I mean, how likely is it that you can have a reaction from kissing someone if they've been eating, for example, nuts, or if they've had dairy or egg, for example?
Well, it's all, you've got to come into contact with the protein. It's the protein in the food that people are allergic to. So you've got to come into contact with that protein in order to have a reaction. Obviously, the worst reactions that people have come from ingesting. But residual proteins can remain, for example, on people's hands. I think if somebody's been eating a bag full of peanuts, for example, you know, if you're being practical about this, if somebody's been eating a bag full of peanuts or some nuts, you are going to get residual proteins in your mouth. You know, they maybe stick between your teeth. You know, so if you're going to be kissing somebody, then yes,
there is a risk.
Potentially there is a risk. I think if it's a sort of family situation where you're just kissing children when they come in, you know, make sure, I think, that anyone who's been eating the problem allergen maybe washes their mouth and the hands and brushes the teeth. But I think it's probably a greater risk for young people who perhaps go to clubs and are meeting up with other young people. And it can be embarrassing to actually mention that you have an allergy and ask people what they've been eating. But it can be a risk, but it really depends on what the person's been eating, how long beforehand, you know, whether they've brushed their teeth. But potentially, I think, particularly for things like nuts, which can get stuck in the mouth, it potentially is risky. So again, it's just being aware and, you know, mentioning to people in a sort of, you know, very sort of sensible way. Just say, "Oh,
it is.
It's embarrassing.
It is a bit awkward, but better that than having a reaction." And also, young people who are out drinking. We mentioned alcohol earlier on. It's important not to share their drinks, isn't it, for the same reason? So if somebody's been eating peanuts and then drinks from, particularly from a bottle or a can, but even from a glass, there can be some protein left. So be careful about sharing drinks and making sure that you stick to your own drink, which is pretty good advice across the board anyway. It's again being a bit sensible and doing a bit of homework, isn't it, and sort of just making sure that you let people know that this is something, particularly if you're going out with a group of people maybe they don't all know you.
And I think, you know, when people go to bars and clubs, that they do still, I think, have, you know, bowls of peanuts out and about, and it's easy to sit there for people having a drink, you know, like a handful of nuts maybe, and then, you know, you're going to get that residual protein on your hands. So if you haven't washed your hands, there's a possibility that you know, it can cause some cross-contamination. You know, we don't want people to be paranoid.
No.
The risk is less than ingestion, as we said before. Ingesting it is the greatest risk. But if you've got residual proteins on your hands, that can be transferred to other surfaces.
And we know people who are actually allergic to the touch of peanuts or being in the same room. So it's important to note that, and also important that, as you say, that people who are not allergic to peanuts will still be eating them in public, possibly more so at Christmas.
I think it's important to stress that the smell of an allergen, so for example the smell of a nut itself, is not a risk. If you've got a lot of people opening, for example, bags of peanuts, as you would on an aircraft, then the nut dust can become airborne, and the proteins can become airborne. So potentially they could be inhaled. But the proteins aren't present in the smell as such.
It's the dust from the nuts.
It's the dust, that's right. I think if you're allergic to a particular food, the smell of it can sometimes make you feel ill anyway. But you actually would have to inhale the protein or come into physical contact with the protein or ingest it in order to have a reaction.
So we talk quite a lot about foods, particularly nuts, which are an issue at this time of year. Are there any other allergens other than foods? Anything else we should be aware of at this time of year?
Yes, there are a couple. I think people with latex allergy, there aren't as many people with latex allergy, but it can be a huge issue. Latex allergy is a really big problem for those who have the condition. So obviously at Christmas there are likely to be balloons around.
Yes.
And, natural rubber balloons, latex balloons can be a problem. Also, I think some people may have a problem with Christmas tree spores.
The real Christmas trees.
So I think you'd probably know if you did have a problem. But equally, I think there are people who perhaps have an allergy to mould. And I think if you've got a real Christmas tree that's been in the house for some time, it can perhaps generate some mould spores, and that could potentially be a problem. So if you do have a problem with mould, it's probably a good idea not to keep the Christmas tree in the house for more than a few days.
And what type of symptoms would you see with that? Would it be sort of a wheeze or that type of thing?
It's probably more likely to be wheezy, wheezy type symptoms.
Right.
But as we said earlier, it tends to be the food allergy that's more of an issue at this time.
And we're all eating more food at this time of year, so it does tend to be an issue.
Yes.
And any other tips that aren't specifically related to food or the allergen? Any other things that people should maybe prepare for, get on top of now?
Well, I think the important thing is to take charge of your medication at this time of year. First of all, it's a holiday season, so check that your medication is in date and that it's not due to expire. Your asthma inhaler, your adrenaline injector, just make sure that
and your antihistamines,
make sure that they're well within their expiry date, and if necessary, get an update. Carry it with you.
Right.
I think the temptation is there's a lot of exciting things happening. The temptation is maybe to rush out and you might forget your medication. So make sure you've got it with you at all times, no matter where you're going, even if you don't think you're going to be eating. Just take it with you, because you never know. And I think on a sort of a similar vein, if you do have a reaction, and we hope that people won't have a reaction, but that one of the important tips is not to stay on your own. I think young people in particular, if they're with a group of friends, if somebody has a reaction, there's a temptation to maybe go off to the toilet on your own.
Yes.
You're embarrassed and you don't want your friends to be bothered. You mustn't do that. It's really important to, if you're not feeling well, to tell somebody stay where you are ideally, and get them to, if necessary, to use your injector and call for an ambulance. Or if you do need to go to the toilet, then somebody go with you and don't lock the door. Yeah,
that's really good advice. And I mean, it's the same advice that we gave in the last webinar, and that we'll probably give in every webinar that we ever give, is that always have your medication with you, because if you haven't got your medication, then it's not going to work. And also let people know where your medication is. So it is tempting this time of year, particularly when you're going out partying or you're spending time having fun with large groups of people. It is quite tempting to want to sort of just brush it under the carpet, but let people know where it is so that they can help you if there's a problem, and do all the things that we've suggested, and just keep safe, really.
Yeah, and enjoy yourself.
Enjoy yourself. I think that we decided to do a webinar on Christmas because there are lots of questions that Moira gets asked on the helpline at this time of year. We thought we'd bring them all together, but actually in preparing this, these are good tips for throughout the year anyway. It's just a case that we buy more food, we eat more food, and we spend more time socialising this time of year. So it is very important. And I think the key thing that Moira mentioned is to make sure that your medication is in date. Don't leave it till the last minute.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Moira, once again.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. As I mentioned, you could ask questions. If you have them, we'll get back to you within the next few days with an answer. But do remember, you can call our helpline 01252 542 029 at any time over the next few weeks. We're here right up until the 23rd. If you've got any questions at all, not specifically around Christmas, any questions at all, We'll be back in the new year where we've got a new series of webinars planned, where we've got some guest speakers coming in to talk to us. We've got speakers from the medical world and also from the food industry. Moira and I will be back to do a few more webinars next year. If you've got any ideas on what you'd like us to cover, please do feel free to drop us an email. So look out for the link if you want to listen again, or if you want to share this with people that weren't able to listen to us this time. It will be available online pretty shortly, we hope. And in the meantime, we'd just like to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Christmas.
And we will be online again in the new year. So Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.